In the commercial real estate business, we write offers, right? No matter what part of the equation you're on, you are writing offers. Today, we're going to discuss the hidden psychology of offers. So, the way it works is that there is usually an asking price for a transaction, and a buyer comes in and they write what they believe they can offer for the transaction. If they're a tenant or a lessee, they're doing the same thing. They write an offer, and that offer then gets sent to the seller or the lessor. It's a non-binding agreement, right? That LOI, the letter of intent. Now, when they offer, there is a standard, as we know, for what points are in an offer. They're usually the entity, the dollar amount, the security deposit, if they are a tenant or lessee that they would offer. There is a contingency if they need any other kind of licensing or a certificate of occupancy or any other kind of governmental documentation that supports them being in the property. There is the actual property that they're leasing. So we identify the property, we identify the square footage, we identify the square footage of the property, the square footage of the land. We identify who the brokers are, which brokerage represents the seller or the lessor, which brokerage represents the lessee or the buyer. Is it the same brokerage? We identify the total monies that are due for a transaction, which means the amount of the total monies that will be given to the landlord if it's a lease. If it's a sale, then we identify what the deposit is. And there are some other points, but I think that gives us a groundwork on offers or letter of intents. Now, when we're listing all of these points, they are very much matter of fact, right? We look at a LOI, the points are matter of fact. Point 1, point 2, point 3, just like the points I went over. But what we don't pay attention to sometimes is the hidden psychology of all of those points. So let me explain. Each party comes into the transaction before they offer with their own life experience, their own fears, their own motivations. And we need to identify what those are for ourselves, but we also need to identify what they are for the other party, because the other party is going to interpret our offer under their own perspective. That's really important for you to understand. The other party that we write the offer to and send it to has their own motivations, fears, and their own thought process on the transaction. So if they're a seller, one of the things that sellers are always concerned about is selling for the right price. They do not want to leave any money on the table. That is one of their biggest fears. Their biggest fear is that they're not going to sell for the right amount. And you hear about sellers regretting selling for a particular amount many, many years down the road. If you're a buyer, you don't want to overpay for the property. That's one of your biggest fears, one of your biggest concerns. You don't want to overpay for something. It's not worth this price. If you're a tenant, it's the same thing. You don't want to overpay for something, or maybe it doesn't have some of the natural components that you want in the building. If you're a landlord, you're afraid that that tenant is not going to last, that their credit worthiness isn't there, that they don't have strong enough financials, and they may not be there for the entire 3, 5, 7, or 10 years of that lease. And that's a fear that you have, whether you communicate that to your brokerage team or to your tenant or not. You as a landlord want to be able to pay your debts and pay your mortgage. As a seller, you want to be able to close on the transaction in an efficient way without too many contingencies, right? So for example, let's say you're a buyer and you need a lot of contingencies as part of your offer. That directly tells the seller that you are unsure of whether you can close on the transaction or not. That tells the seller that there is fear there without ever saying anything, without ever mentioning that you're afraid or that there is fear behind the offer, it tells the seller that. If you're a tenant and you send out a really aggressive offer that's asking for low rent, free rent, and a tenant improvement allowance, and you combine all of that, well, that sends a message that you're a very aggressive negotiator. And the landlord could perceive that as you're somebody who's disrespectful or someone who's looking to take advantage of somebody else. But on your end, you may just see it as, well, I'm looking to get the most possible. So every single term has a psychology behind it. We just talked about long contingencies. We just talked about being very aggressive in your negotiations as a tenant. But what if you're the other way? What if you give the owner exactly what it is that they want? Well, now you could be perceived as somebody who does amicable negotiations. You're somebody who just makes things simple. And the landlord's life will be easy when dealing with you. If you're a buyer, if you have an all-cash offer with no contingencies, that signals that you're simple to work with, or that you are sure that you can get this deal done. And that allows for you to negotiate other terms more. So there is a psychology behind each point of a transaction. And our goal is to look at each point, put ourselves in the other party's shoes, and figure out exactly what their interpretation of our offer would be, based on what they're going through, based on their unique situation. The more you understand their situation, raising questions like, why are you selling? How long has this been on the market for? What's the motivation? Try to understand their age. Try to understand what their background is. Try to understand what they did for work. Try to understand how many other properties they have. If they only have one property, then their psychology on your offer is going to be different than if they have 10 properties or 20 properties or 100 properties. If they sell properties all the time, their psychology is going to be much different than if they sell properties once every 15 years. If you understand all of that, then you'll be able to create offers that are much more aligned and that signal exactly who you are and what you're looking to achieve. So in summary, we want to understand each part of an offer. We want to understand that there's a psychology behind each term of the offer. We want to understand the psychology behind what we offer, and we want to understand the psychology of the other party as they're reviewing that offer and where they're at in their process. At Kommercial Real Estate, we break down the psychology of LOIs in a way where you feel like you have control, where you see the conscious and subconscious elements of the LOI, and we leverage that so that you can have the best transaction possible.